When a patient is diagnosed with coronary artery disease, modern medicine typically treats the condition as a progressive, irreversible decline. Doctors prescribe statins to manage cholesterol levels and deploy metallic stents to force open blocked vessels, stabilizing the patient. The underlying atherosclerosis, however, is expected to slowly worsen over time. Historical data from mid-century Okinawa reveals a sharp deviation from this trend. These populations achieved extreme longevity, with coronary arteries that showed almost no evidence of the calcified plaques typically seen in Western autopsies. The foundation of this cardiovascular protection was their specific nutritional architecture. The traditional Okinawans consumed a highly restrictive, plant-dense diet, where fat made up barely 6% of their total calories. They relied almost entirely on nutrient-rich whole staples, specifically the purple sweet potato, to meet their daily energy demands. This extreme lack of dietary fat presents a biological alternative to the progressive model of cardiology. If a population eating 6% fat avoids atherosclerosis entirely, it suggests that reversing the disease in those already sick may depend on crossing a specific, measurable nutritional threshold. Sardinia and Icaria provide a contrasting model of longevity. In these Mediterranean blue zones, total fat intake often reaches 45% of daily calories, yet these populations still maintain world-leading cardiovascular health. Medical organizations heavily rely on these regions to promote a substitution model for heart health. The logic dictates that the total volume of fat you eat matters less than the type of fat you choose. By swapping out saturated animal fats for unsaturated plant fats, primarily extra virgin olive oil and nuts, the body is protected from arterial damage. Substituting fat sources works effectively for keeping healthy populations safe from early heart attacks. The biological tension arises when we look at secondary prevention. We have to determine if simply swapping out one fat for another is biologically sufficient to physically dissolve existing plaque in an already compromised patient. The substitution model is supported by large-scale public health data. In North Karelia, Finland, shifting an entire population away from dairy fat and toward plant oils resulted in an 84% reduction in coronary mortality among working-age men over 4 decades. To prove this effect in a clinical setting, researchers point to PREDIMED. This chart shows the results of that landmark randomized controlled trial, which tracked thousands of high-risk participants. The data indicates an approximate 30% reduction in major cardiovascular events for those placed on a fat-supplemented Mediterranean diet. But a closer look at the methodology reveals severe cracks in that foundation. After publication, it was discovered that 21% of the participants were never properly randomized. Some clinics assigned entire households to the same group. Researchers also halted the trial years early, a statistical error known to artificially inflate the apparent benefits of the diet. This pie chart illustrates the most critical flaw for our plaque reversal question. The study claimed to compare the Mediterranean diet against a low-fat control group. In reality, by the end of the trial, the control group was consuming 37% of their calories from fat, far above the 10% benchmark required for a true low-fat clinical diet. Ultimately, PREDIMED successfully proves that a Mediterranean pattern is superior to a high-fat Western diet. It entirely fails to prove that the Mediterranean approach outperforms a genuinely low-fat protocol. To find clinical evidence of active plaque regression, we must look at the quantitative restriction model, pioneered by physicians like Dean Ornish and Esselstyn. Their protocol mandates that total dietary fat drops strictly below 10% of daily calories, requiring a whole food, plant-based diet with 0 added oils. This animated diagram tracks the 5-year results of the Lifestyle Heart Trial, the first peer-reviewed study to document angiographic reversal of heart disease without surgery. In the experimental group following the 10% rule, patients experienced a 7.9% relative regression in arterial stenosis. The blockages actually shrank. Looking at the parallel artery for the control group, the contrast is stark. Patients receiving standard medical care, eating a moderate diet and taking their prescribed medications, saw their plaque progress and thicken by nearly 28% over that same 5-year period. Dropping fat intake below 10% isn't an arbitrary dietary preference. The data indicates it acts as a required biological floor, forcing the human body out of a state of slow decline and into an active state of cellular repair. The mechanism behind this repair comes down to apolipoprotein B, or ApoB. These microscopic particles carry cholesterol through your bloodstream. When the liver is overwhelmed by a heavy influx of dietary fat, it produces excess ApoB particles, which then forcefully embed themselves into the arterial wall, creating the foundation of an atherosclerotic plaque. The source of that fat matters less than you might think during the post-meal digestion window. This graph measures flow-mediated dilation, the capacity of your arteries to properly expand. Following a single high-fat meal containing extra virgin olive oil, arterial dilation capacity drops sharply, plummeting by up to 31%. As the line flattens out in red, it highlights the suppression of nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is the critical molecule your endothelium produces to keep blood vessels open and initiate cellular healing. When you ingest a concentrated dose of liquid fat, your vessels lose their ability to produce it for hours. The whole food plant-based architecture bypasses this trauma entirely. By eliminating all extracted oils and strictly limiting total lipid intake, the digestive system never receives a concentrated wave of fat. Without that postprandial lipid stress, the endothelium maintains a continuous, uninterrupted flow of nitric oxide. The arterial environment shifts. Instead of constantly defending against new waves of dietary fat, the body can finally begin to dissolve the plaque that is already there. The medical debate between fat quality and fat quantity doesn't require us to choose a single winner. Instead, it creates a clinical fork in the road. These two dietary patterns serve entirely different mechanical functions depending on the patient's current disease trajectory. For healthy individuals aiming to prevent plaque buildup in the first place, the Mediterranean model provides a robust architecture. Eating a 30% fat diet rich in nuts and olive oil will protect a healthy cardiovascular system from premature decline. But for patients with established coronary artery disease who want to actively shrink their existing blockages, the standard of evidence changes. The whole food plant-based protocol, keeping total fat strictly below 10% with zero added oil, is the only dietary architecture with peer-reviewed multi-year proof of active angiographic regression. Patients can navigate this transition quite smoothly. Moving from a Mediterranean diet to a strict plant-based protocol upon a severe diagnosis is a matter of clinical escalation. You are treating your macronutrients with the same precision as a physician increasing a pharmacological dosage. A cardiovascular diagnosis does not mean your health is permanently locked on a downward trajectory. Armed with the correct dietary architecture and an understanding of the biological thresholds required for repair, reversing heart disease is a physical reality.